The city's pulse fades with the last train's departure. I always found a strange comfort in the hush of a late-night station, the fluorescent hum a lonely lullaby. But tonight, the silence was different. It was heavy, suffocating. I'd missed the last express to Kawago, a stupid mistake after a long day. The departure board was blank, a black mirror reflecting my own tired face. A station attendant, his features lost in the deep shadows of his cap, just pointed down the platform without a word. "Another service? Soon," he'd mumbled, his voice like rustling leaves. I should have questioned it. I should have just called a cab. But a strange exhaustion had settled deep in my bones, a weariness that went beyond just a long day at the office. So I waited. The minutes stretched into an eternity. The usual station announcements had ceased. The distant city hum was gone. It was just me and the cold, unblinking lights. Then I saw it. At the far end of the platform, a single unlit sign flickered to life. The characters were old, faded. Kizaragi platform, it read. I'd never heard of it. It wasn't on any map. It felt like a name whispered from a forgotten dream. A chill, entirely separate from the night air, crept up my spine. A low rumble began to build. Not the familiar clatter of a modern train, but something older. A groaning of metal on metal that seemed to emanate from the very earth beneath me. Headlights cut through the darkness, but they weren't the bright, sterile LEDs I was used to. They were dim, yellow, like tired eyes opening after a long sleep. The train that pulled into the station was a relic. Its body was a deep, bruised purple, almost black, with rust bleeding from its seams. The windows were grimy, reflecting the platform lights in warped, distorted streaks. The doors slid open with a pneumatic hiss that sounded like a final, drawn-out sigh. There was no announcement, no cheerful jingle. Just an open invitation into the darkness. Every instinct screamed at me to turn and run, to get away from this phantom train and its ghost platform. But my legs felt like lead, and the thought of waiting in the unnerving silence of the station was somehow worse. With a deep breath that did nothing to calm my racing heart, I stepped across the threshold. The interior was just as ancient as the outside. The seats were covered in worn, crimson velvet, the kind that feels cold to the touch. The air was thick with the smell of dust, damp metal, and something else. Something faintly sweet, like old perfume or dying flowers. The lights flickered erratically, casting long, dancing shadows that seemed to have a life of their own. I was the only one in the carriage, or so I thought at first. I chose a seat by the window, hoping to see the familiar city lights, some sign of the normal world. But outside, there was only an impenetrable, featureless black. We weren't moving through a city, we were moving through a void. That's when I saw him. Seated at the opposite end of the carriage, almost perfectly swallowed by the shadows, was a figure. I couldn't make out a face or any distinct features. It was just a silhouette. A man-shaped patch of deeper darkness. He was unnaturally still, more like a statue than a person. I told myself it was just another tired commuter, lost in his own world. But the longer I looked, the more that feeling of wrongness grew. The silence in the carriage was absolute. No engine hum, no rattling of the tracks. It was as if we were gliding through a vacuum. My own breathing sounded thunderous in the oppressive quiet. I tried to look away, to focus on anything else, but my eyes kept being drawn back to the silent figure at the end of the car. Then, the train entered a tunnel. The carriage was plunged into absolute blackness for a few seconds. When the lights flickered back on, my heart seized in my chest. He was closer. The figure was now sitting several rows nearer. Still perfectly motionless, still just a silhouette. It wasn't possible. I hadn't heard a single footstep, not a rustle of clothing. He had just moved. Panic began to bubble up, hot and acidic, in my throat. This wasn't real. It had to be a dream, a hallucination brought on by exhaustion. I squeezed my eyes shut, praying that when I opened them, I'd be back on the deserted platform, or better yet, in my own bed. But when I looked again, he was still there, a silent sentinel in the flickering gloom. Another tunnel. Again, that brief, terrifying plunge into darkness. When the lights returned, he was closer still. Now, I could almost make out the shape of his shoulders, the faint outline of a hat. I could feel his presence, a cold spot in the air, a weight pressing down on me. I scrambled to my feet, my hands shaking. I had to get off this train. I lunged for the emergency door handle, but it wouldn't budge. It was cold, fused, shut. I hammered on the window, but the glass was thick, unyielding. My shouts died in my throat, absorbed by the dead air of the carriage. There was no escape. A third tunnel. This one felt longer. The darkness was colder, more complete. When the lights stuttered back to life, he was sitting directly opposite me. I could have reached out and touched him. And now I could see. There was no face. Where his features should have been, there was only a swirling, indistinct void, a patch of shadow that seemed to drink the light around it. But I could feel it looking at me. I could feel its gaze, and in it, I felt a terrible, soul-crushing sense of recognition. A memory, long buried, surfaced with brutal clarity. A rainy night, years ago. A winding mountain road. The slick gleam of asphalt under my headlights. A flash of movement. A sickening thud. I hadn't stopped. I had told myself it was just an animal. I had driven on, heart pounding, and buried the memory so deep I had almost convinced myself it never happened. Almost. The figure, this shadow passenger, didn't move. It didn't speak. It just sat there. A perfect reflection of the guilt I had carried unknowingly for all these years. It was the part of me I had abandoned on that dark road. The train began to slow, the same groaning sound echoing through the carriage. Through the grimy window, I saw a platform emerge from the void. It was identical to the one where I had boarded. The Kisaragi platform. The doors hissed open. This was my chance. I didn't hesitate. I scrambled out of my seat, not daring to look back at the faceless thing that wore my guilt. I stumbled onto the platform, gasping the stale metallic air. The train doors sighed shut behind me, and without a sound, the phantom train slid back into the impenetrable darkness, taking my shadow with it. I stood there for a long time, my body trembling. I was alone again on the deserted platform. Was it over? Was I free? I felt lighter. The heavy weariness that had plagued me was gone, replaced by a strange emptiness. I saw a small, cracked mirror hanging on a pillar, the kind station staff might use. I needed to see my own face to prove to myself that I was still me. I walked towards it, my footsteps echoing in the silence. As I drew closer, my reflection came into view. I saw my tired eyes, my pale face. But something was wrong. On my head, I saw the stark, dark shape of a conductor's cap. My clothes had changed, replaced by a crisp, dark uniform. I reached up, and my fingers brushed against the smooth fabric of the cap. I looked down at my hands. In one, I was holding a silver pocket watch. In the other, a tarnished brass whistle. I looked back at the mirror, and my reflection smiled. A slow, hollow smile that didn't reach its eyes. The departure board above me flickered. New characters burned brightly in the darkness. Next stop, the final destination. I turned my new uniform strangely comfortable and waited for my next passenger.